Okay, we're getting breaking news right now. This is on the Amnesty International report on Rohingya terror. Remember, last year in August, there were mass graves that were discovered in Myanmar in the Rakhine region, and it was believed that the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army was behind the killing of Hindu minority groups in Myanmar. And now an Amnesty report is saying just that 99 Hindus, including women and children, were abducted and massacred by Rohingya terrorists in August 2017. It reveals details mentioning how Hindu women, children and men were first robbed and then murdered brutally. The mass graves were found, and a lot of details had emerged at that point. India had also sought information. Abhishek Kapoor, our executive editor, joining us. Abhishek, during that period, there were high-level consultations taking place between India and Myanmar. This case of mass graves had created a lot of concern in India, and now this report really nailing the fact that the radical Rohingya elements could have been behind those killings of 99 Hindus who were found later in mass graves.
Well, Parikshit, this Amnesty report is actually a mirror to those activists who believe that Rohingyas are being persecuted in Myanmar and in the rest of the world. The fact is that this Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, which was set up in 2012 and has been spreading its tentacles of terror, not just in Myanmar, but even outside also. We have had reports, our intelligence agencies have confirmed, we did that story about a couple of months back, how the ARSA was fueling discontent among the Rohingyas in India as well. We have had reports coming from Jammu and Kashmir. We have had reports coming from some other parts of the country that ARSA had been inciting the Rohingya refugees within India as well. So they are continuing to indulge in these kind of acts, and that is why the state response that is coming in from the Myanmar side, it has of course become an international crisis of concern, but at the root is the actions done by this terror organization, the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army. The graves we had covered, Parikshit, at that time were found, which included both the Hindus and the Buddhists, the predominantly Buddhist nation of the Myanmar that it is. And this report essentially confirms what we have known for a while. What is more important is those bleeding hearts, activists who believe that it's only the Rohingyas who are being persecuted. It's essentially the state. It is essentially because of the actions of these kind of organizations in Myanmar that the state response is leading to that crisis.
Okay. All right, Abhishek, stay with us. We're also getting a word in from Amnesty International. Let's play that out for our viewers, and then we'll see whether we can go across to our other reporters.
So around 8 a.m. on the morning of the 25th of August, ARSA fighters surrounded a Hindu area of a village known as Kamongsak. They forced the men, women, and children to come out from their homes. They rounded them up, brought them together, and then they marched the men, women, and children off to the outskirts of the village. There they divided the men from the women, and then they killed execution style, first the men, and then the vast majority of the women and children as well. A mass grave was subsequently found with 45 bodies that included many children under the age of 8. There are 8 women who survived on condition that they agreed to convert from Hinduism to Islam. We interviewed all 8 of those women, which in combination with forensic evidence and testimony from people from villages nearby is how we at Amnesty have now come to the conclusion that ARSA is responsible for this massacre.
All right, so that was a spokesperson for Amnesty International who's actually explaining the fact that they've gone through all the reports, they've spoken to all people who've lost their loved ones and come to a conclusion that it was the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army behind those killings. So this really gives a lot of credibility to the Indian government's affidavit in Supreme Court, where they said that there could be radical elements who could create trouble in India, and that's why they must be sent back to Myanmar. Of course, that issue is pending. Deporting them is not very easy, but at least the Indian government's theory gets more teeth over here.
Well, Parikshit, if that question was to me, the fact of the matter is that the links between Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army and Pakistan-based terror organizations have also been established, and that in turn, their connections with some of the Rohingya elements within India as well. So agencies are concerned, and that is what got reflected in the affidavit of the central government before the Supreme Court. The matter is still sub judice, but this is essentially a confirmation of what has been going on in Myanmar, and whenever the state has responded to preserve its sovereignty, the Bleeding Hearts activists have come out in defense of the Rohingyas. But what this report essentially proves from the Amnesty International is that the start was done by this so-called Salvation Army group, terror group actually, and which elicited or attracted Myanmar's government response, which led to the refugee crisis, some of which, most of which is being faced by Bangladesh, and some of which in India as well. And the fact that they are developing connections with Taliban, with connections with Pak-based terror groups like LET, clearly shows that it's an area of concern for India as well.
All right, Abhishek, I'll request you to stay with us. Let's try and listen into the spokesperson of Amnesty International once again.
The credit goes to Amnesty International for actually verifying these reports and actually putting it in the context of the broader violence, that this was not a one-sided violence, that it was a very asymmetric security operation provoked by ARSA attacking government installations, and as Amnesty has documented, actually massacring Hindu civilians. Now, that doesn't justify in any way the government's massive response that drove out nearly 700,000 Rohingya. It doesn't excuse it at all, but it does put another layer of complexity into the violence over the past year.
Executive Editor Abhishek Kapoor, he continues to be with us. Abhishek, any response that we're getting from the Indian government? How are they seeing this? Any reaction from the MEA or the Home Ministry?
Well, I have spoken to a couple of sources in the government, and Parikshit, they say that this is a confirmation of what their the intelligence agencies have been zeroing down on in terms of ARSA being a terror organization, developing links with Taliban and some Pak-based terror groups, and in turn trying to foment trouble in India because of the Rohingya refugee population spread across the country, essentially in Jammu region of Jammu and Kashmir, and in UP and Bengal as well. So the government is concerned. This report obviously would add to its presentation before the Supreme Court, where the matter is pending as to how the Rohingya refugee issue has to be dealt with, or how they can be repatriated and sent back. So the government obviously taking this report seriously, and as I said, it is important for the Bleeding Hearts also to realize that when it comes to terror and the situation in Myanmar, a greater part of the responsibility has to be taken by this terror organization called ARSA.
So, following this report, could there be an increase in the kind of surveillance that our intelligence agencies are doing? Will they now look for such radical elements in the Rohingya population? We've got a large Rohingya population. There would be at least 40 to 50,000 Rohingyas in the entire country. There are there in Jammu and Kashmir, there are parts of South India, New Delhi, in the northeast, in West Bengal as well. So is there now going to be greater surveillance? Is this report going to be a cue for the intelligence agencies?
Parikshit, independent of this report, scrutiny or surveillance has been going on, because this government's plank has been that they would be repatriating illegal migrants, be it from the Rohingyas from Myanmar or from Bangladesh as well, particularly in the case of Assam. So in that sense, that action or those actions are actually going on parallelly, independent of this report. But as I said, this report really strengthens the government's stand before the Supreme Court that the Rohingya issue has to be seen from the internal security prism as well, and not just from the human rights angle which the activists are trying to project.
That's right. So this Amnesty International report will be extremely crucial, and there were many who were questioning the government. There were affidavits also filed in Supreme Court saying that Rohingyas will be forcibly sent back. They have refugee status and they cannot be sent back to Myanmar in this manner. But as far as the deportation of Rohingyas are concerned, this is a long procedure and it cannot be done immediately. That is what Home Ministry sources were indicating when this crisis had also broken out, that this is a long procedure. First, we have to identify people who don't have the right papers, and then we have to consult the government. So how have those consultations been taking place in the backdrop?
Parikshit, there are two things. One is the repatriation process, which is a long-drawn process, which is subject to legal issues. And then there is the other issue of internal security dimension. And that's even more serious and an area of concern, essentially, because, as I said, ARSA has developed strong links with the Taliban and Pak-based terror groups. We had done, in fact, a story basing it in sources in the intelligence community where they were making a direct attempt at inciting this Rohingya community within India, be it in Delhi or Jammu or in some parts of Bengal, and that they were succeeding in radicalizing them and creating cells that could foment trouble and terror in India. So that aspect is going on. Agencies are concerned, and this report essentially buttresses their claim before Supreme Court, for example, where the case is going on and where the human rights activists want the Rohingyas not to be repatriated or to be treated with kid gloves. And when you get reports like these confirming the terror element, terror angle, and the internal security aspect of it, then obviously the strength, the hands of the government get strengthened, and the agencies would be hoping that this report is also taken into account when the Supreme Court takes its final call.
All right, we're trying to get activists, we're trying to get politicians and experts on the phone line for more on that, for a greater perspective. But Abhishek Kapoor, our executive editor, continues to throw light on how the government is responding. The government essentially saying that, yes, we had prepared a report, we had filed an affidavit in the Supreme Court and said that, yes, there could be certain radical elements among the Rohingya population who could create a threat for the country. Rahul Ishwar, Abhishek, is joining us on the phone line. Rahul Ishwar, social activist. Rahul, how do you respond to this Amnesty International report? Because there have been many who have been questioning the Indian government's move to deport the Rohingya population, as some of them could even threaten the security of the country.
Exactly. There are two very important things. First thing, it is a shocking report, and as an ordinary citizen and an activist, I would like to thank Republic TV for bringing it to more highlight in Indian popular narrative and discourse. Amnesty International is a well-respected organization when they themselves are saying with the same usage that Hindus were rounded up and one particular Hindu village was attacked. It's a matter of grave and serious concern. Activists like me have always called for some kind of a soft approach to Rohingya. But having said that, when this report comes out, people have to revise their position or think about some sort of measures to accommodate this. See, we are very compassionate people, but that doesn't mean our people can be killed and we can be giving compassion. That is neither compassion, that will amount to foolishness. So this is a very important report that will force a rethinking on the whole Rohingya narrative on many circles. I hope all...
And Rahul, do you also think that questions... All right, Rahul, we've completely run out of time, but thank you very much for joining us. Abhishek Kapoor continues to be with us. Abhishek, and today questions must be asked of the Congress party and all those activists, of all those civil society representatives who had filed affidavits in the Supreme Court, who had cried hoarse at that time, saying that the Indian government was ill-treating refugees, people who had either been thrown out of their country, who had run away from exploitation in Myanmar.
Well, Parikshit, for example, let's get Akar Patel online. He's the head of Amnesty International in India. This is Amnesty's report and what he has to say, because I remember earlier he has taken a stance on behalf of the Rohingyas and taken cudgels on behalf of these activists, saying that Rohingyas are not being treated well and that the manner in which they are looked at with suspicion does not look good on India as a host nation for these refugees. But as I said, this report essentially strengthens and buttresses the claim of agencies, security agencies that the Rohingya colonies that have come up in cities like Delhi and Jammu and Bengal, they essentially act as fertile grounds for radicalization, and that is exactly what has been happening, and this report essentially confirms that.
All right. Thank you very much, Abhishek Kapoor, for putting that story in perspective. We'll be getting all reactions through the day, and stay with Republic TV to stay ahead on this big story.